What's up, fam? Ivan Savage, Peaceful Savage Show. Good to see you again. My friend Souki asked what my issue with Christianity is. And his follow-up question was, how did Judaism begin and how was it interrupted by Christianity? And I wanted to take a couple of days to really kind of figure out how to answer that question, because it's a very deep question. It really is. It takes a lot of explaining that I didn't necessarily know if I was apt to do, but I believe I am, okay? My issue with Christianity is that it's a complete con job. And I know what people think when I say this. I get it. Like, you're a Jew. Obviously, you believe that. But see, here's the thing. Like, I wasn't raised a Jew. I wasn't raised anything. The guy that adopted me was raised Catholic and he didn't want any religion in the house. Like, you see behind you. This is where I learned my religion. You see? Like, I don't say that Christianity is a con job lightly. I don't say it lightly. I don't say it in any kind of mean-spirited nature. Like, it is literally the biggest con job in human history. And I also want you to understand that for a very, very, very long time, I was on the fence. I really was, as to whether or not it was a hijacked story or a completely fabricated story. But then I realized, after very long amounts of study, for real, I mean, I wasn't prepared to make a conclusion until I had some serious evidentiary proof either way. So, like here. I read, just about everything that I could find as far as explanations. I really got into Heschel for a little while. He was a phenomenal help. But it wasn't really until I read, sorry about the interruptions with the camera, it wasn't really until I read Guide for the Perplexed about 15 years ago that really changed my perspective on a lot of it. But when Judaism began, Souki, and anyone else watching this that's interested, when Judaism began, it wasn't necessarily a monotheistic religion or religion. It was a philosophy. The worship of deified dead people had completely encompassed the earth. It was the whole that anybody knew. Aside from a handful of people, a handful of men, the whole world worshipped these gods. Now, in the New Testament, it's called idolatry, which in Greek it's ilitres, which isn't really translated into English. It's just kept the same word, just pronounced differently. What ilitre means is the worship of heathen gods. That's literal from Strong's up here, dude. right here. I've got the regular Strongs, this new Vines Concise. I got the strongest Strongs, bro. You think you're strong and strong? I got the strongest Strongs. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay. It literally is defined as the worship of heathen gods. Now, that is all of it. The whole of idolatry is the worship of these gods, right? All the heathen gods were deified dead people. I have to get you to understand this correlation. That all of the gods, which it goes on and on and on throughout Torah, throughout the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, it goes on and on throughout the one chief concern of Yahweh Sfaot, the one chief concern is eradicating idolatry, eradicating the worship of these silly gods. If you really dig into the Old Testament, the eradication of the worship of these gods and the ideologies of them is the chief concern of the Creator. It's the one thing that provokes him to jealousy, right? Which, you know, if you really learned, I guess, once you dig into the Hebrew and dig into all the different allegories and start packing them together, like Isaiah says, in line upon line, here a little, there a little, you start getting it, right? The worship of gods, the ideology of divinity, the human divinity, is the concoction of tyrants, the Nephilim, a bully or tyrant, strongest strongs. It's the concoction of tyrants. So the whole earth only knew the worship of these gods and their ancestors, their offspring, the Nephilim, right? The bullies or tyrants, the princes. It only knew this. It only knew the the idol itself is just the representation of the deified dead person, right? So here comes Christianity and says that the whole soul way of salvation now is idolatry. Logically, it just doesn't make any fucking sense. Pardon my French. It just doesn't make any sense that the Creator, Hashem, Achya Asher Achya, I am the existing being and that which existing beings. Like, there's so many different ways, I guess, you can actually midrash that and kind of interpret that. I am that I am sucks. It's just really a watered down, Nipsey, fucking idiot version of it. But it more means the existing, that which is existing, all of it. The entire conscious universe in its entirety. All of it. What we look out as, what is the new telescope, the space telescope showing us? That a lot of what we thought were stars were actually other galaxies. This thing is vast. It's unknowable. It's unfathomable. The whole conscious universe, everything is conscious. And if you don't really kind of delve down into the idea that consciousness gets really fucking small and minute, right? Ants, amoeba, everything is conscious. We have flowers that catch flies. They would have to be conscious and self-aware enough to know that there was a fly on it to catch it. You know? Full planets. solar systems, suns. It's all consciousness. I read an article the other day about how scientists have actually kind of they've seen the moment where light, photon, becomes matter, where consciousness becomes matter, right? You're telling me that the conscious universe in its entirety, that's already every man, woman, child, insect, animal that has ever walked the earth, tree, the stone I threw into the Lake of the Ozarks 20 years ago, you're telling me that this is all need to be one guy who died for my sins, but you can't prove it in the Old Testament. There's nowhere in Tanakh that it says that any Mashiach would die for anyone's sins. This is what I learned. Con men work in half-truths. You know, they find something that's actually factual, and then they build this entire story around the fact. It is a fact that Judaism believes in a Mashiach. It's one of the 13 Judaic principles from Rambam. We believe that a Mashiach is going to come and bring world peace. That he's going to be able to explain this thing, this experience, the consciousness, the entirety of it all in such a way that no one will reject him. That the knowledge of Hashem is going to encompass the entire earth, and there won't be any more prophets anymore. There won't be any more war. There won't be any more strife. And it's like the Hermes, or the thought says in the Pymander, that envy will be gone, is stricken from humanity by the access of truth. We will all have access to the understanding of this truth that is out there, right? It is literally out there. More people get into conspiracy theories and tropes and biases, and they believe the half-truths. That's the main problem, is more... A lie will make itself around the planet 1.5 times before the truth ever even has time to put its pants on. The Flavians created this propaganda against the Sicarii and what I would call the Mashiachic Jews. They're not Messianic Jews, because you have to understand that etymology is a real science. Messiah is a Latin term. It's not a Hebrew term. Mashiach meaning anointed. Right? We believe that this guy that is from Hashem, that Hashem spirits up and is going to rise and is going to be able to put an end to all this nonsense that is going on in the world. Now, during the time when Rome had invaded Judea, when there were several different revolts, there was a point in the war where the Jews were seriously giving them a run for their money. I believe historically that it was more the Souki that burned down Rome than it was Nero himself. Nero lost it, no doubt. He never really wanted to be emperor. He wanted to be a rock star. No, I mean, that's absolutely no bullshit. During this time, Vespasian was sent by Nero to handle the Judea conflict. Once Nero was dead, a couple of emperors came and went. Vespasian is announced emperor in Judea. So he goes back to Rome to settle scores. Like, you have to understand, these are the richest people in the world at the time. Vespasian was worth trillions, hundreds of trillions of dollars in today's value. So he goes back to Rome and sends his son Titus to handle business down in Judea. Now, Titus's mistress is Berenice, Herod the Great's granddaughter. That's his mistress. This is well documented. It got so bad with her that Titus actually had to send her away because she was pissing off all the Roman citizens, like her even being there. This messianic movement, this Mashiachic movement, was actually gaining ground. It was gaining a lot of converts even out of the Roman citizens. You see, the tyranny of the Romans and how these people handled business was really getting at even the normal Roman citizen. It was nothing but tax. You can do this, you can do that, but you can't do this and you can't do that. Like, it was an endless barrage of the Nimrod system, like the system of total control. So, I believe it was Berenice's idea eventually to propagate a Mashiach that basically bent over and shotgun style and gave everything to Rome that they wanted. I believe Paul, who only wrote maybe 6 of those letters, maybe. The rest of them are pure forgery. Now, I Christian apologists don't like the term forgery. They'd rather the term pseudepigrapha, which literally means falsely attributed. They don't like. I like forgery. Me and Professor Bart Ehrman, we absolutely 100% agree on this. It is absolutely forgery. It's somebody else trying to inflict their theology onto the movement. Now, when I said that I was on the fence of whether or not it was a hijacked story or a fabricated story, I realized it was both. There was this Mashiachic movement, and there were several different leaders within the Sicaris that were thought to be the Mashiach, but as soon as they died, Simon Bar Kokhba, he was arrested by the Roman army in the back of a mine, trying to cut himself out of the back of the mine with a bunch of stone cutters. When I read Josephus, I'm not sure that you can see this because I can't see the screen, but this here is the entirety of Josephus, and this here is the entirety of Philo, and that's Xenophon and Plutarch, Tacitus, Livy, Apostolic Fathers, Eusebius. Once I got into reading all those, right, and I read Josephus's Wars of the Jews, it's quite interesting how Simon is arrested in the back of a mine with stone cutters, and Jesus encounters a demon cutting himself with stones in the same timeline of the New Testament chronologically. It's really interesting how the entirety of the Wars of the Jews, which is basically Titus's campaign of Judea, taking them out, mirrors exactly, to a point of like 250 billion probability, Jesus's campaign, where he encounters a demon cutting himself with stones, which is weird considering they had pretty decent knives and swords back then. It's all the insurrectionists were labeled as demons. Like the name Mary actually literally means rebellious woman. This is what the Romans thought of Jews, especially the ones that were like, fuck your tyranny and your idolatry, right? So they created this Mashiach out of an amalgam. They created this Jesus character out of an amalgamation of several different Sakari leaders. But it's also an allegory of Titus's campaign against Judea. It's all in the wherever Jesus starts wherever the story has Jesus in Judea, Titus's campaign is going on at the exact same time in the exact same timeline. Now, you have to understand that Josephus he was an Alexandrian Jew. He claimed to be a lot of things, just like Paul claimed to be a lot of things. But it's easy to be taught, it's easy to claim to be taught by a guy who's already dead. Oh, well, he can't tell you whether or not I learned from him or not, right? So they created this Jesus character, to just submit to the authority of Rome after maybe 350 or so centuries. Like 350 or not centuries, but years. After about 3 centuries, they melded the story over the course of it. Philemon, Titus, Timothy, all these different books were added. Hebrews. They started shuffling all these different things in, codexing what they wanted it to be. Tiberius Alexander, which is Philo's nephew, was Titus's chief of staff during his campaign in Judea. Now, Flavius Josephus was adopted by Vespasian. Vespasian really thought himself something. If you read his books, those ones down there are all in Greek. This entire works is all actually a translation of English, which I don't disagree with really any of it. I don't disagree with any of the translation and any of the other English translations of his works that I have. I just wanted to read it in Greek to make, all translation is interpretation, period. When I want to bounce back to where Judaism began, because before Moshe, the idea that one supreme being ruled the entirety of the universe was unthought of. The thoughts of the idolaters at the time never rose above the heavenly spheres. That's it. It never, they never got outside of what we would call, I guess, the solar system in thought process. They weren't thinking universally, they were thinking locally. But They invented this. They invented this idea of divine humans, that the really smart ones should rule over you and do whatever the hell you want, and then when I die, I'm going to be this leftover God guy, and my descendants are going to rule in my stead. Josephus's writings describe the Mashiachic Jews at the time as they militantly anti-idolatry. They would, under extreme torture, they would never call a man God. And Josephus goes on to describe the children undergoing the same torture and never relenting to the same. Even the children, till death, would never call Titus Lord nor a man God. It was later that Tacitus conflates the Mashiachic Jews to the early Christians. This is an erroneous correlation. When the Flavians, I believe it was their entire intellectual circle, the Dead Sea Scrolls, I have them in their original languages here, and I've got several different books up there on it as well. The Dead Sea Scrolls talk about these wicked priests, the Sadducees, that kind of flipped over and went over to Rome. You got Titus. Vespasian's dead by this point, or on his way out. Because I also think, don't really have anything to back that up, but I really honestly believe that Paul was working for Vespasian and subverting the same idea. The Mashiachic movement, subverting it. So you got Titus and his mistress Berenice and Tiberius Alexander and these wicked priests, along with Seneca, who was Titus's tutor growing up. He learned from Seneca. Although the letters between Paul and Seneca are absolute forgeries, what really I try to impress upon people with my content, my channel, is that the lies tell us a lot more about the truth than honestly the blatant truth really could. Because the lies kind of nip away and only leave the bare. You know, this bare absolute truth. If you can prove something to be a lie, then how can it be the truth? If 1,000 lies can never amalgamate to the truth. It just can't happen. So along my fence line walk of whether or not it's a hijacked or a fabricated story, I'm going back, and each and every single time that Paul quotes the Old Testament, I go back and I read in context all of it that he's quoting, not just what he has up there, which is what a lot of people do. They'll go back and they'll see, oh yeah, he says that, but they don't even read the rest of the line in the Old Testament. It's like half the time Paul half quotes, most of the time he misquotes, and this is like blatant errors from somebody who's supposed to be a Pharisee of the Pharisee. Like, no, you can't make these types of blunders and call yourself like the most educated man ever. Paul was a con man. When somebody tells me, when somebody is going on and on about this thing they're trying to convince me of, and they feel the need to tell me, I'm not lying to you, the first fucking thing I think into my head is, this motherfucker's lying to me. How many times does he have to say it? He's full of shit. The whole third day prophecy doesn't even exist, bro. It doesn't even exist. Where he's supposed to rise on the third day. There's no prophecy that any Mashiach is going to die for anyone's sins. There's no prophecy that any Mashiach would be a Netzarit. There's no prophecy that any Mashiach would be born of a virgin. They work in half-truths. Yes, Parthenos can mean virgin, but see, the original language it was written in, it never meant to... All translation is interpretation. If you translate it into another language, you're completely pulling the meaning of what the intended author says, what he means. You're taking it away. The word virgin it's not there. Batula means virgin. Straight up. There's a Hebrew word for that. It's batula. China Alma, behold, the young woman, does not mean virgin. If it did, I might be onto something, but it doesn't. So that nips that one right off. Like, if they have to lie, this is where I ended up in my conclusion. If they had to lie, how can it be the truth? If they have to misquote, you don't misquote. You don't half quote. He quotes the part where, the law is a little bit hard to do, but he completely leaves out the part where it says that you can do it. Like, that's my issue. The Flavians created this in all of it. Like, even the Pope, even the first Pope after they murdered Simon Bar Kokhba was a Flavian nephew. And it wasn't until 323, 325, Constantine Flavius Constantinus makes it the religion of the state. Every single one of these historians are connected to the Flavians. There's not one piece of evidence, not one shred of evidence outside of Flavian connections that has any kind of proof that any of the New Testament actually ever happened. I've read as much history as I possibly could. Like, I waited 30 years to make a conclusion about any of it. So when people tell me that I'm indoctrinated, you're just a Jew, you're just a Zionist Jew, you just believe what they told you. It's like, they've never told me anything. I learned from these guys. I learned from Ankelos, Ramban, Milstein, Rashi, Rambam, Maimonides. That's who I learned from. Like, I wasn't raised Jewish. It wasn't until almost 7 years after I decided to go with Judaism that I even realized, after I did my ancestry, that I even realized I was actually Jewish. I just knew that the philosophy of Judaism, the anti-idolatry, the anti-theist, people, when and I like to confound the ignorance out there by saying that I am an atheist in the name of Yahweh. They don't get it. What do you mean? The Jews over the course of millennia have always been accused of being atheists because we don't believe in the divinity of these human dead ancestors these people worship. That we believe that the living conscious universe doesn't need to be a man. And he damn sure isn't going to make his salvation plan change from just doing righteousness to idolatry, the main concern of him trying to eradicate from the human existence, the human sphere of existence, the intellect, the pure intellect. Get it gone. That all is divine or nothing is. You, Souki, my brother, are not more divine than me, and I'm not more divine than you. It doesn't work that way. None of it, the whole idolatrous system, these deified dead people, they're dead. And then you got these people coming along, hey, we have the authority of the dead guy, so you have to do everything we tell you and give us all your money. Or at least 10%. Like, no. That is my issue. It's an absolute fucking con job. They made most of the story up. Most of it is actually an allegory of Titus's campaign. These things were written in a time when allegory and metaphor were thought of and taught as sciences. And Josephus really thought himself something. He only allowed himself to get beat by 2 years by Jesus in answering questions to the Sanhedrin. Jesus was 12, Josephus was 14. I was 14 when the Sanhedrin kept asking my answers to different judgments. Josephus claimed to be everything. He's like that dude in the neighborhood that claims to be a part of every gang in the neighborhood, whichever one was winning. He was in that gang. That's Josephus. Then he bitched out and went over to Rome and got adopted by Vespasian, who soon dies. Titus takes him 6 months, for whatever reason, I don't know, but Titus has him deified through the Senate. Well, what's that make Titus? That makes Titus the son of God, doesn't it? Weird little correlations there. You see, the idea of the Mashiachic ideology, the Mashiachic Jews that believed a Mashiach would come, and Christianity is night and day. It's two different things. They hijacked the concept and the ideology of it, and they fabricated the rest. It's war propaganda. And sadly it worked. You know, but that's Yeremiah, Yechezkiah, Zechariah, Amos. They all say the same thing, especially in the 4 servant songs of Isaiah 40 through 60. They all say that the rise of the kingdom of Edom, and 45 talks about the absurdity of the crucifix, and 13 and how people don't even think about it logically, that they're going to fall down to worship the trunk of a tree. Like, they don't even get it. But it talks about how I believe that Christianity had to happen in order for Jew and Gentile both to learn. You see, people get hung up on the idea that the Jews are chosen people. Well, what about me? Why can't I be chosen? They don't even really get what the Jews are chosen for. The Jews have been the whipping boy. The whipping boy and the teaching tool. The example. You see? The report in 53 that everybody can't believe. Oh my, what do you mean? The last 2,000 years have all been for an absolute con job by the Flavians? What do you mean? Just look at the gold. Look at the gold in their houses of Baal. Look at all the thrones. I mean, it doesn't take a genius necessarily to figure it out. Everybody's kind of understanding that there's one faction that's really not in the best interest of humanity, but they also live under this preconceived notion that Christianity in general is the good guys. It's not. Not at all. The ideology of the Mashiachic Judaism was hijacked and eventually converted to Rome over a course of a process. It wasn't until Nicaea that they kind of orthodoxed the process of what was going to be the backbone, the spine, I guess you can say, of the new religion. But it took that 350 years or so to make it happen. Now, at the Council of Nicaea, they actually even chose the name of their new god. And the two gods were chosen, and by decree of Roman law, they both became one, and eventually three as worshipped as one. But in the beginning, Judaism really isn't a monotheistic religion. It is an anti-theist philosophy. Because like I said, the worship of deified dead people is all that they knew back then. And then here comes Moshe saying Abraham was the first one to say the idols were... Then you got Moshe that comes and explains the entirety of it through Torah. That these tyrants created this system, that they were divine, and divine right to rule was given to them. Okay, by who? Moshe comes along and says, no, you don't have the right. You're just a human. The conscious universe says, you're full of shit, and we're going to go off and do our own little thing. We don't believe in deified dead people. We don't believe in man gods. We don't believe in vicarious atonement. It's really just that simple. When I came to my conclusion, it wasn't necessarily lightly. I had been going to Messianic synagogues and talking to different rabbis, most of them female for whatever reason. Doing some more digging into that whole Messianic movement and where it came from, out of, some archaeological digs in the 60s, along with the Dead Sea Scrolls translations being circulated in the late 50s. And then you got the archaeological digs in 60, 67 through 73. All these different things were being found. And the Southern Baptist Association decided to combat it by, again, usurping everything that was coming out and creating this whole new different genre of Christianity out of the South, um, called Messianic Judaism. Like, nothing about it is Jewish. Like, the people that are in it, the people who teach it, none of the rabbis are Jewish that I have encountered, I guess. I don't want to say that blanketly, but like, it's pretty much all Christianity, just with a Judaic little kick. And everything they do is rabbinic tradition. That's what really got me, is they're so against these rabbis, but everything they do is rabbinic tradition. It comes from, like, the Talmud. So, like, I heard all the propaganda over the years about the Talmud and the Talmudim, I guess you can say, but, like, it says this about Gentiles, it says this about children and this and that, and it's like, okay, I guess I really need, if I'm gonna, if I hear these things, I gotta trace it down. What did I say? Conmen work in half-truths. So I gotta trace it down, right? Then I realized that's exactly what it was. It's half-truths. It's arguments. It's debates. It's this guy's opinion and that guy's opinion, and then that guy's opinion and then that guy's opinion, and then eventually there's a final ruling. Like, it's arguing over every law in the Torah. That's it. It's not definitively stating any either way, right? They quote this one little part, which most of the rumors that I had seen didn't even exist in the Talmudim. It just, they're not even there. The ones that did were just taken out of context, and it means something completely different. So it's like, if you gotta lie, how can it be the truth? Which is just kept, every time that I realized that everything was a half-truth, the more I got to the truth, like, I knew that I was narrowing into the right way, like, right path. I knew that I was going in the right direction. Like, if you gotta lie, it can't be the truth. So this has to be the truth. It's like Occam's razor. Once every other explanation is exhausted, whatever's left, however improbable, has to be the truth. And that's why I chose Judaism. Because all the slander and lies against it were nothing but half-truths. So my issue is, it's caused a lot of damage to my people for the last 2,000 years. And the whole concept of divine humans and other humans having their authority after their death is just stupid. It really is. It's wind. Isaiah in 43 calls it a menstruous rag. I mean, it doesn't get any more blatant than that. The whole concept, the whole ideology is just stupid. It has led us to nothing but blood and death. Islam, I don't blame the Arabs for creating Islam, but they've created, the Arabs, Muhammad created Islam as a complete objection to the spread of Christianity and their warmongering. They were slaughtering Arabs by the tens of thousands. So I get it. But I mean, even he was murdered and replaced by his lieutenants. The writings were corrupted. How did Christianity interrupt Judaism? It damn near canceled it out. But Hashem, in his infinite absolute wisdom, mercy, and providence didn't allow it to happen. No matter how many civilizations have tried in the last 2,000 years, didn't happen. We're still here. Still here wearing these. Still here wearing these. We're still here with the same exact Torah we got at Sinai. That is why I am. I wouldn't be a Jew if Judaism wasn't the truth. Because when I set out to learn, I was 7. When I set out to learn, I decided a long ass time ago. I mean, 6 years before I realized that the Torah was the truth, and I was still on the fence about the messianism. I almost, right before that, I almost converted to Islam because of where I was at in my studies, where I was at in my learning. I'm glad I didn't. But I learned, I set out long ago to like go wherever the absolute truth took me, no matter where that was. To be flexible and retroactive, like not get hung up into bias, not get pigeonholed into one ideology that I wanted to be the truth. I couldn't do that. It was what I wanted. What I was after was reasoning, like in this suffering. So, for a very long time I've had pretty rough and fucked up life. Years of homelessness, a couple of calendars incarcerated, being locked up with AB dudes, being locked up with SSGs and, the Muslim Brotherhood dudes. Like, years of experience in one hard-fought life. I realized that the only thing that I really wanted to understand was what I eventually called the sinuous law of undulation. Just cyclical loops, cycles of same situations, just different circumstances and different you. But I realized that the conscious universe itself is like almost playing chess with life, with every living organism and creature, including humans and animals and plants and minerals and metals. Like, it's playing chess with life. The conscious universe is working everything towards an end goal of growth and expansion. And intellect and consciousness plays an intricate role in expansion throughout the whole of the universe. It can't be about one guy. It's got to be more about one person's individual place within the organism of the whole. It's not about one guy and his death for sin. Like, that doesn't even make any sense according to Torah. Like, the blood sacrifice, which was a female goat for sin, was only for unintentional sin. So that doesn't even make any sense that a full-grown man is going to pay for everybody's sins. That's just it's a backdoor idolatry. My main issue with it is that this propagation, this war propagation, snuffed out the real movement and what the Mashiachic movement stood for. You know, it stood for peace. Like what's going on in Palestine, Gaza. You know, before the 30s and 40s, Palestine was just what the whole region was called, and everyone that lived in the region was called a Palestinian. The Palestinians were Jews. Then it comes later, 60s, Arafat comes and starts calling everybody Palestinians, and everybody kind of took it. But it's just what the mandate British people called it. And that's just a rub to the Jewish people out of what Hadrian did to begin with, which was just a rub of the Jewish people. These people were rich and petty. Very, 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 very petty. You read Josephus's Antiquities and Wars Against the Jews in Greek or in English, it really doesn't matter. I don't disagree with any of the translations that I've read. You come across this odd little note at the end where there was this total calamity about the temple of Isis that threw the whole Jewish nation into an uproar, which doesn't make any fucking sense at all, right? There's no temple of Isis in Judea. So you got to wonder, what the hell's this guy talking about, right? That's how he begins the story. Then he's got this lady and this dude. This dude wants to bang the lady, but she won't let him because she's really religious. She says, no, can't do it. So the dude's really distraught. He says, man, I'll give you 250,000 drachma. Come on now. Let me hit the pony. She says, no. You know, I'm too religious. So this other lady, this mistress lady, comes to the dude and says, don't worry about it, I got you. Just give me 25,000 drachma and I'll take care of it all. So she takes 25,000 drachma, goes over to the temple, and has this dude dress up as this other god, right? Sends a letter to the lady and says, this god at the temple wants to have a night with you at the temple. So she's really religious. She's thinking, man, you know, like if the god is, this is a real big honor for me. So she goes to the temple, and the dude that wanted to bang her puts on the, you know, the Anubis mask, and he has his way with her all night, the story goes, and leaves the next morning. 3 days later, he comes back to tell her, hey, I was just faking, you know, I don't really have anything to do with this business of names when I don the mask of Anubis, but thanks. She's all distraught. She goes and her entire life is ruined. And the whole allegory doesn't necessarily make any sense in its placement and along in the storyline of his writings, unless you kind of realize that the woman was Israel, the man was Titus. Titus played like he was the son of God in the Mashiach and had his way with the woman, Israel. And then, hey, just kidding. It's not 3 days, like the whole correlation thing. I mean, mathematical probabilities. It's incredible that the whole story wasn't written by their little intellectual circle all at once. Even the Gnostic texts. Now, some of them circulated And if you really get into reading all of the manuscripts from the earliest all the way through, you start to realize where and when they changed things, edited things out, put things in, which letters are forgeries and which ones were actually written by those people, which Surapigrafa means falsely attributed, but like all of the Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, neither any of those men had anything to do with writing those books. That's church tradition. It's church tradition that those books are authored by those people. But there's no evidence whatsoever. They're anonymously written. All of them are. And then after a certain amount of time, you start to get the forgeries. Hebrews, Ephesians, Galatians. Like Paul's little tirade in Galatians 3 about not being seeds. You would think that the Pharisee of Pharisees would know that there's no biblical Hebrew word for seeds. It's just zera. There's seed. The reader would know in context, or the hearer would know in context, whether the person speaking or writing was talking about one or many. If they have to lie, how can it be the truth? The truth exists, or the lies wouldn't. We have to be intellectually strong enough to trace down each and every single half-truth to get the whole truth. It almost took it out, Souki. That's how it interrupted it. But I think that the idea that one supreme being ruled the entire universe had to be spread in a way that everyone would learn, Jew and Gentile. The Jew being the teaching tool to teach the Gentile, and the Gentile being the teaching tool to teach the Jew. And that's what I believe the four servant songs are speaking about. In the report that, this is the dangers of idolatry, where it will end up. And this is what can happen on the other side. Holocaust, annihilation, hatred, slander. They thought we didn't know, but we do. And eventually, like Zechariah says, when the time comes, Jeremiah talks about the fall of it too, when men will all come to Hashem, and they will say, that they inherited nothing but lies and vanity. These worthless and powerless gods of no use at all. Do men make gods for themselves? Yes. And this time I will teach them, and this time I will make them to know that my name is Hashem, and they will know my might. That the whole conscious universe wants to eradicate this nonsense from the human sphere of existence, because it's death, it's wind, it breeds tyranny. It bleeds tyranny. It leads to nothing but war and strife. None of it makes me happy. In all, it makes me exhausted. I've been depressed. For almost a month, I've been depressed, frustrated, exhausted. The amount of propaganda is insane. My issue with it, Souki, is that it allows that propaganda. It gives a baseline. This con job, this provable lie, gives a baseline for the propaganda against the Jews. And It's unreasonable. It's delusion. And I know I speak bluntly. You know, I'm a little brash sometimes. And I laugh a lot at motherfuckers because it's just mocking them is the only way. There's no amount of evidence that's going to persuade a fucking idiot. There's just none. Half the time, I don't even think they care. I think they're just bots that just keep repeating the same crap over and over and over again because it's paid to or programmed to. Who the hell knows? But soon, just like Zechariah says, that they'll be coming by the tens to grab a hold of our zitzots. They'll be coming by the tens to grab a hold. It doesn't say, none of the prophecies say anything about hold tight to the sacrifice or to the only son. There's nothing in there that even alludes to it. It doesn't say that 10 Jews will be going to grab the skirts of Gentile Christian preachers. You can't grab a zitzot if you don't wear it. The whole thing is, and I'm not like, there is some truths within Christianity. Some of the ideologies and philosophies, they are true, but it's just a parody of Torah and Tanakh. It's just a parody of it. They repeat some things and then they go off on it. It's half truth. Where there is contradiction, there cannot be truth. Love your face.